Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another great episode of the unfiltered, uncensored, unapologetically black show. Speak to the mic. I am your illustrious host, Marlon Joseph. And here on this show, we like to do three things. One, we like to provide helpful content to the Black community. We like to talk to Black men and women of all professions, industries, and organizations in regards to what they're doing. And we like to acknowledge those Black men and women who are using their professions, positions of power, and even platforms to help push the culture forward in a more positive light. Make sure for all you all who are viewing this episode and viewing previous episodes who haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel and Spotify, be sure to hit that like button, that comment button, and that subscribe button to all of my platforms that you can find this show on, that being all podcast platforms as well as my YouTube channel. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Let me know what you think about previous episodes and previous content that I've put out. This particular topic is the most talked about subject in our world today, primarily in the political realm, as it pertains to the racial disparities that we as Black people have been enduring, not just in this country, but just in the world in general, right? And so this has been a very touchy subject for the right-wing media and their propaganda that they've been pushing in our society today, as it pertains to teaching today's kids what this actual subject matter actually pertains and what it consists of. And so joining me today is a former professor at my alma mater, Russ College. Shout out to Russ College, HBCU grad and alum. He is an assistant professor of history, as well as a assistant director of the Ruth J. Simmons Center of Race and Justice. Dr. Marco Robinson, brother, thank you so much for being on this show to talk about this issue. This has been ongoing for the past few years now. And I can only imagine with you basically specializing in this area, how many conversations you have or have been having, and what those conversations have been like organically as it pertains to the responses you've been receiving from Black men and women who have been even touched by this subject, and even anyone else who's not Black, who's actually been familiarized with what this actually means, because it's been diluted, it's been hijacked, and been redefined in so many different ways and areas to where it scares a lot of people to even talk about that. So on this show, we talk about everything that's Black, good, bad, and indifferent, because we're out to change the narrative about Black people and help our Black brothers and sisters get to a place where we're monolithically doing our parts to help us get ahead in life as it pertains to our race. So thank you again so much for being on this show. I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk to me about this subject. Just for starters, man, I mean, what way can I even ask this question? This is the base question to ask. What is critical race theory?
Well, Marlon, that's the magical rabbit in the hat that everyone has been trying to define over the last 3-4 years with this movement that started across the country, to where people have started this witch hunt against certain topics or certain things that they have deemed to be countercultural or anti-American. They've called it critical race theory, and I think that's something that we need to have more centered discussions on exactly what it is, because when you actually ask pundits what it is, many of them don't even know what it is. And being taught in public schools in particular, most public schools don't even have an African-American studies or African-American history course. So they don't teach critical race theory. And so
absolutely not.
Something that we have to be aware of, and it's our fault if we're not conscious or we're not cognizant of what people are peddling, right? And so I think that's something that we need to be thinking about and always to be aware of. But critical race theory starts in the mid-1970s. You have some of the first legal scholars, Kimberly Crenshaw, Derek Bell, Richard Delgado, and others, people's work that I use in my college courses with students. And if you get that in undergraduate and college, you got a good teacher.
Absolutely.
Most students don't even get that until they get into graduate school. And so I want you to think that this is a very minute number of students in higher ed that get access to this. And you think about that, there are groups of people stating that this is being taught across the country. And so they kind of appropriated a term, right? And they're using it to garner support around, teaching of things related to minorities and ethnic groups. And so I think that that's something that's very very apparent in this movement. I think along with this, I think that we need to keep in mind that this starts when 17 attorney generals sent a letter to the Secretary of Education about 2 years ago. And so as a result of this, they asked him to stop a list of things that they saw that were un-American, teaching things that were counterintuitive to the American way of life. And of course, these are all code words and language that were used during the 1960s. If you were a civil rights worker or you were working for any type of equality, those who came South or those who were indigenous to the South, who were part of the civil rights movement, you were seen as a communist, right?
Yeah, that term gets, oh my God, it gets thrown around so much. A communist, you're a socialist. And it's like, do you really know what these words mean? Like throwing this around saying that, okay, everyone having affordable health care in this country is considered a communist, right? Yeah. Or a socialist. It's like, but other countries, like in China, even their homeless people have medical coverage. We're 40 years behind the pale of even making sure that our citizens in this country,
you don't have to go to China.
Taxpaying citizens.
You can go to Canada, just north of us, right? So I think that these are all things in terms of when we think about them, that we need to really reconsider our values as Americans and the things that are written in the Constitution in terms of living up to those things. There's
much so
that we say we do that we don't always actually do. And I think that we need to put the spotlight on ourselves and always live up to that, because that's what the founders of this country would want us to do in terms of creating and making sure that everyone is realizing that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness that we espouse, right? When people, when I travel across the country, when I go to Africa, when I go to Europe, and when I go to third world countries in the Caribbean, even when I was in Brazil, people are asking, that one of the top destinations in the United States of America, this idea that we are the land of milk and honey and American exceptionalism, but we have to make sure in terms of on the world stage, we're living up to these ideals, right?
Absolutely.
So that's very important. And I take that as an American citizen. I do claim my American citizenship. I think that's very important. And this new movement against CRT is a movement that's attempting to provide erasure to an important part of who we are as American citizens in terms of the history. And all history is American history. I mean, we think about the multitude of ethnicities and races that came here and contributed to the building of this country. We have to think about that as a hodgepodge of different pieces. And as it relates to those different pieces make up the whole. And so when we start taking pieces off of that whole, there are voids that are left there. And so is blue Americans history greater than red Americans history? And so when you start thinking about that, that we're nitpicking and we should be looking at things in their totality. And instead of trying to look at things along propaganda lines, we look at it as all of us being a human family, and how do we approach these issues that we're facing as human beings and address those issues, right? And I think that's very important in terms of the very core of it, in terms of my ethics and the way I see it and my worldview. But I think the other side of this is, particularly as it relates to CRT, is you have people, particularly in the African-American community, who've always been big proponents of making sure that our communities make our children and members aware of their history. I mean, you think about your experience at Russ College and the stuff that Dr. Stovall did.
Yep. And I had Dr. Stovall on my show previously, and we were talking about just the differences between African-Americans and African-born citizens. And he was basically there to mitigate that or just mediate that topic, and because he gave his perspective as to what things, what things have transpired over the years, primarily when he used to host those tours of taking,
Right.
Rush College students to different parts of Africa, when he had those African trips, talked about, his experience in Ghana and things of that nature. And so, and I had two other guests along with him. One was from Ghana and the other one was from Nigeria. A friend of mine, Olushula Ezekalu, who was from Nigeria, who I went to Rush with, one of the smartest individuals I ever met in my life. And they were basically there to talk about the racial disparities that they've even encountered with their own race here in America. Like, it's just
Right.
so many of us in America as Black people, like to your point, don't know the bare minimum of our history, except for Dr. King and Rosa Parks and just those fundamental names that we oftentimes hear about. But when you go into more in depth in regards to our history as it pertains to it being American history, we don't know a lot of those things. And so something that you touched on earlier in regards to how some of us don't even know some of these things until we get to college. A lot of this stuff I did learn even in undergrad and even in grad school as well. And so for me, knowing that a lot of these racial topics aren't even being talked about on a high school level, and having these right wing politicians and lawmakers sit up here and hijack the idea of what critical race theory is actually consistent of. It's funny to me how we oftentimes here in America talks about its freedom, liberty, and justice for all, but don't want to live up to those principles and standards on an everyday basis. They don't want to be held accountable for what the real truth about America really is. And so you oftentimes hear these white politicians, primarily Republicans, who are sitting up here saying, oh, well, they're teaching our kids to hate themselves and hate where they come from. Well, let's dial it back for a second. See, this country was built off theft, and what's the word I'm looking for? So besides theft, deception. You deceived. Europeans colonized the almost the entire continent of Africa, with the exception of Ethiopia. And I didn't learn that Ethiopia was the only country in Africa that wasn't colonized until I was in college, which is fascinating to me, because I was just thinking to myself, okay, well, why didn't the other nations around Ethiopia not even come up with that same concept and say, you know what, you can stop right there. You're not coming any further than that to come in here and infiltrate what we have going on in our country, versus understanding that we even play somewhat a responsible role in our own demise in that regard, being too nice, being too welcoming, and being too generous when it comes to letting outside people into our country, into our continent, and into our culture, basically to infiltrate it, steal every damn thing that we had, still stealing today, still stealing to this very day. I mean, when your own culture and your own race is based on stealing from other countries and other cultures, and basically deceiving them and infiltrating them to a degree where you have us fighting ourselves. That origin started with them. It did. And that's the reality that they don't want to face. They don't want to sit in that reality and have to deal with that in real time to help these kids who are living in this world today and saying, well, listen, I'm not sitting up here telling you that every white person is racist. What I am telling you, though, because I'm never insinuating that, but what I am saying is every white person benefits institutionally and systemically from the racial barriers that have been put in place 400 years ago or so. So if you're not using your platform and your position of power to break down those racial barriers, then you're basically saying you're okay with how things have been going. You're okay with how Black people are being marginalized and treated and discriminated against on an everyday basis. Don't give us your sympathy if you ain't willing to do a damn thing about it. We don't want that. We want you to pull up and do something about it. If you claim to be an ally, if you claim to be a person that says, hey, listen, I love all people. Okay, prove it then. That's the mere fact of what this is. So go ahead.
It's funny that you bring that up, Marlon. I'm working at on a project right now, which is a nationally, acclaimed project, where we're looking at the university, which Prairie View University is a historically Black college, the first public supported historically Black college in the state of Texas. And we're looking at the existence of the plantation that was operated on the school grounds prior to the university being established there.
Wow.
As we're going through this history, we're partnering with the family that owned the plantation, the descendants of the family. And so we've had to face some hard truths about what happened there, right? Going back to the point that you were making about as we look back, we can't just have blind eyes to the bad stuff that happened, right?
Yeah.
We have to address those issues that are so strikingly apparent, right? And so I'm very appreciative of the approach that the family is taking. You know, we look at some of the slave narratives and some of the stuff that happened to the women on the plantation, and how the men were beaten, the violence that accompanied slavery. That's something that people don't like to talk about. You know, we like to think about just simply our exploration of slavery simply stopped at the fact that somebody owned you and could tell you what to do. No, that is undergirded by the fact that this person has power over you. And if you don't do what they tell you to do, they can kill you. Let's be very direct about that. And I don't want to give any type of lackadaisical notions about what the power relationship in slavery was, particularly to our kids. There was no really running away. And then to be truthful with you in terms of the large numbers of slaves, a very small percentage of slaves ran away.
Yeah, or at least tried, to. Yep.
So I want you to kind of understand the dynamics around that, you know, something they understood in terms of preserving themselves or maintaining life. Their best chance was to go along.
Yeah.
Self-preservation. And so I try to make sure that my kids in my household understand it. And so this idea that, you know, we often have, if I was living back then, I'd be dead. No, you make some choices about your life.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny you say that about that term choice, right? So obviously we've had in the past few years, we had an idiot who's a celebrity say something stupid like slavery was a damn choice when it wasn't. We didn't have a damn choice but to do what our ancestors didn't have a choice but to do what was told to them to do, right? And so, and you think back on that, but then realize that where we are today, most of us who are acknowledging the fact that we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our ancestors and what sacrifices they made for us to be here. And I take that very seriously and very personal when anybody, especially in our own race, disrespect the idea of what our ancestors did for us to even be here today.
Right.
My ancestors sacrificed themselves unwillingly too, by the way, because it wasn't their choice to sacrifice themselves. They wanted to live a life of freedom and be poverty-free and things of that nature and be able to be successful in their own lives. And so I oftentimes talk about how back then you didn't just take slaves from Africa. You took doctors, you took lawyers, you took teachers, you took entrepreneurs and made them slaves. And so from that perspective, that makes me think back on even the example that you brought up of how most of our slaves back then were trying to run away. So I oftentimes think about Nat Turner and what I learned about Nat Turner in school, which was, you know, after a while of him being rebellious against the slave masters, and some of the horrendous things that took place during that time of him beheading not only the slave owners themselves, wives, kids, things of that nature. And I think back on watching, me and my wife went to go see Birth of a Nation. And Dr. Robinson, when I tell you, I walked out at that theater, not only angry, but I was in tears. And I was just like, man, all this shit we done been through, I bet not hear not one white person say something stupid to me about, oh man, that was in the past. But yet you're still doing this shit even to an extent today. Don't tell me if it's in the past when the present is showing me that it still exists. You're still doing it to us. So from that perspective, and I think back on this as well, that we oftentimes forget how serious not only slavery was, but then when it came down to the birth of Jim Crow, when it came down to these disparities that we're going through today, with them trying to undermine, undo the voting rights. You're basically showing us exactly what you really mean, what you really think about us. You're trying to basically go back into that time where you had all this power and positions of power to do what you did then, to try to do what you can do now. And so for me, And then one thing I want to bring up too is I read this article from Fair Fight Initiative. I'm not sure if you ever heard of them, but I want to read this to you. And I want you to tell me what you think about this. So it says, fundamentally, CRT is an approach to holistically studying U.S. policies and institutions with a wide focus encompassing such subjects as criminal, legal, employment, housing, healthcare, education, among other things. And in plain terms, CRT suggests that racism is a part of a broader pattern in America. And at the highest level, CRT basically positions the racism is implicitly woven into our law, including the nature of policies and law enforcement in our communities, drilling down to everyday life that systemic racism impacts everything from hiring practices to home loans. What do you say to that when you think about that?
Well, Marlon, obviously the individuals who crafted that statement they're not taking into consideration people that don't look like them.
Absolutely.
And so I think that's one of the issues. I think that we are so blindfolded or we turn a blind eye to things that don't impact us. Things are not an issue until they actually hit on our doorstep, right?
Yep.
I think that it's very important at this moment. This is a very important moment in American history to where we need to even move past dialogue, Marlon. I'm in a position right now to where I don't like doing a lot of talking about stuff. If we're not planning and putting things into place to impact policy, I don't want to talk. I don't even want to talk about it because I'm wasting my energy on discussions. We've had discussions since 1619 about what we could do and what we should do. I think it's right now there's a new generation, and this is what the dynamic is. There was a book that was written during the early 1900s, right around World War II, World War I, a little after. And it was by a historian. His name was Madison Grant. And the title of the book was The Passing of the Great White Race. And so what Grant was postulating and looking at demographic changes that were going on in the country through amalgamation and that intermarrying and things like that is that, as a result of that, America is going to be like a melting pot where, this dichotomy that we have based on blacks and whites or Caucasian and blacks, that's been thrown off with surge of Latinx people, their population growing in the United States, etc. And so people are watching these demographic changes across the country. That goes back to some of the issues that you mentioned about with voting. Why are you gerrymandering and changing voting districts around to benefit a certain group, right?
Exactly.
You will split a minority district in half or cut it in proportionately all the way across just so you can fit a candidate or potentially give another group a candidate in a certain way. And that's very un-American, right?
Very, I would like to think so.
Yes, this gerrymandering is very un-American. I think that this idea that you can get a benefit off of something that comes as a result of you carving up another group's long-standing district, right? Yeah. And so think about that. You come under the guise of saying, well, because of the census data, we have to. No. You know what type of people, what ethnic group or what race of people live in this particular area.
Absolutely, and even going to the fact that a large number of us showed up at the polls this past presidential election, and so they didn't like that the fact that it was such a landslide when it came to us going out there and participating and voting and using our positions of power in that way. And so once they saw how many Black people went out to go vote and vote a certain person out in particular, they really didn't like that then, because they've been really pushing that damn agenda ever since that day. But it's been even beyond that point, right? And so when you think back on how those racial disparities existed when it came down to, like in Alabama, I remember watching Selma, and it was a Black woman who was looking to vote in Alabama, and they made her name all of the counties in the state of Alabama, and she could name all of them, so they denied her voting right. I'm thinking, oh, okay, so you're basically going to keep moving the goalposts and saying that, oh, well, you all are not educated enough and not smart enough to make such a incredible and important decision as this. Really? Based on what? Your standards?
Right. Okay. So Marlon, I think that this is something that intrinsically, if everybody understood this, like when I see you and I look at your skin color, there's a certain history that's ascribed to people that look like you, right? This could be not true, but it's probably very possible of being true. Your foremothers and forefathers were probably slaves, right? They were brought here forcibly to this country.
Absolutely.
Likely that they experienced some type of segregation, some type of discriminatory practices in employment, discriminatory practices and equal access to government programs, etc. And so if you don't understand that about people's current quality of life, their current station in life, and understand that people didn't choose to be in the positions that they're in.
Absolutely not.
That I had to learn this idea that you can work your way out of the position. That doesn't happen all the time.
No, it don't. Not for all of us. It don't. No, it don't. Unfortunately,
that can happen, but that doesn't happen all the time. Just because. And let me personalize this, Marlon. My own grandfather, a very industrious man. My grandfather went to work every day, Marlon. He was he worked in the concrete business. He was a finisher. He's a guy that would come over once the concrete is laid. He would finish it over, smooth it out, put the curvature in it, etc. Very smart guy, a jack of a lot of different trades, from a mechanic, building stuff, and because of the time frame that he lived in, he had to know how to do these things. But Marlon, he only had an 8th grade education, and it really was probably more like a 6th grade education, Marlon. Now, he had access to a public supported high school in the county, right, that he went to, instead of a private high school in the county that you had to pay to go to, which Black folks was already contributing taxpayer dollars to a public school that didn't even exist, right?
Wow.
I want you to kind of understand that if we walk around and we look at each other coming into the grocery store, and you don't understand kind of my background and my family history, that these are parts of that, why, you know, I don't have a degree, or why I don't have access to certain things, then you would think that I'm a worthless a non-contributor when I complain about things. But there are real history and family situations generationally that go behind why people are in their situations, and that's something that we pass by. And just say that we live in a capitalistic system and everybody has, this is free enterprise, and everybody has the same start and the same opportunities as everybody. No, that does not help. There are some disadvantages that we have experienced. We're not
a lot more than people like to give us credit for, too. Absolutely.
Yes. And so what that is tantamount to, Marlon, is our acquiescing to this idea that, you know, we're victims, but y'all are okay. Look, we dust y'all off, we set y'all up, we passed the 13th Amendment, we passed the 14th Amendment, we passed the 15th Amendment. Now come on, let's go. And not dwarfing the fact that even though you pass these monumental amendments, we still endured the age of segregation when we had to have a civil rights movement. You had like Charles Hamilton Houston, who mounted a legal dismantling of Jim Crow through his cases that he argued during the early 1900s, 2 law school cases, railroad cases, and even leading up to the eve of the Brown case. He died before the case was heard before the United States Supreme Court, but his student, Thurgood Marshall, would argue that case before the United States Supreme Court. So you can kind of see this long struggle. And I think that that's the dynamic of our history that people don't want to really deal with. Then when we look at this racial reckoning that happened with the death of George Floyd and all this attention is being called to these atrocities, this stuff going on all the time. Let's be real.
We've been telling them this shit the entire time. Now, because this pandemic has been a good and a bad thing. We think about the silver linings that have occurred, but they had to be stuck at home, and they were stuck in this. They had to see this shit in real time. And now it was like, oh my God, I can't believe Black people are really being treated like this. Where the hell you been all this damn time? You think we just stopped at one point in time and then just pick back up later? Like, it's been ongoing this entire time. The only difference is we didn't have social media and we didn't have phones to basically record that very evidence of things that we've already been telling you has been going on in this damn country, or in this world for that matter, because racism is not conditioned to just the US, but it's been globally, right? So I think back, and even my previous episode, I talked a little bit briefly about how Black people are even being treated in Ukraine. These are African students who are going to school, possibly to become medical in the medical field, and they're out to try to seek refuge to safe havens, so they won't be killed by what the Russian regime and Vladimir Putin is actually partaking in and doing. So you're stopping them from getting on trains, stopping them from leaving the damn country, really? So you're gonna sit up here in the most inhumane events. You're going to still participate in being inhumane. And you know what I find, before I get to my next question, I want to just talk briefly about this, because I find it so fascinating that America, or Americans in general, they're so quick to say, oh, it's un-American or unpatriotic to talk bad about America and this, that, and the third. Okay, so let's stick to that for a second. So you think it's unpatriotic to even expose the real truth about America? So you only want to put out this facade and this image saying, oh, America is the greatest country in the world, without any definitive proof of that. We're not number one in education. We're not number one in healthcare. We're in the top 5 of, we're number 1 in incarceration though. When you think about how law enforcement even stemmed from the ends of slavery when it came to slave patrol, right? So you thought about the people, just white people, out looking for slaves who have drifted too far away from their plantation, or tried to make a run for it, or anything like that, and they got caught, possibly lynched, or just returned to their master, if you will, as if they were property. And then you think also on the fact that the Constitution itself deemed us as 3/5 of a person. So we've been fighting the same 3 fights, Dr. Robinson, all our existence, fighting just for the sake of being Black, fighting for the sake of even being free, and fighting for the sake of being human. So these same 3 fights, we're still battling in 2022. We're still having racial disparities and even just inhumane situations happening to us, that people are now starting to say, well, you know what? It's unfair that they've been treated like that. Well, if it's so damn unfair, won't you do something about it? And I remember seeing something that you mentioned about the race and how the goalpost is moving when it comes to us winning. So I saw this social experiment where this teacher was actually out in a park, and he had Black people, white people, Hispanics, and all other minorities, rather. So in the same park, and he gave them instructions before the race started. He said, if you had to deal with going without food, take a few steps forward, or if you did have to deal with not being worried about, or not worried about where your next meal was going to come, take 2 steps forward. And so with each and every one of those advantages that he was listing, the white people took several steps forward. So you're already ahead of us in the race. The gun hasn't even gone off yet. We're already in the very back of the race. And now, based on the many adversities that we've had to go through, it's been instilled in us to be the strongest, to be the smartest, to be the most athletic, to be the most talented. And that wasn't necessarily by choice. It was based on the adversities that you put in place for us to have to go through, and actually have, and those barriers that we had to break down. We're living in 2022, Dr. Robinson, and we're still the first at something. The Supreme Court Justice Brown is about to become the first Black woman in the Supreme Court. It's 2022. This Supreme Court Justice, these seats have been around for hundreds of years. You can sit there and tell me we're still at a point where we're the first at something to do something? How ridiculous does that sound? And so to not want to face the reality of what America really truly stands on and what it's really been about, that's un-American. That's unpatriotic. Because if you sit up and say we're doing better or we're striving to do better, okay, then prove that by undoing the systemic institutional racism that's been occurring all this time. And all those barriers that you put in front of us, because Dr. King talked about how you set up here and once you freed us as slaves, you basically gave us nothing to start off with. You telling us to pull ourselves by our bootstraps, but we ain't got boots. How much sense does that even make? You know what I mean? So those are types of things that I think oftentimes about whenever something occurs in real time and in society, where it's another disparaging situation happening to us as Black people. I'm thinking, wow, so y'all really just don't get it, or you're choosing not to get it. So that leads me to my second question about this. So why do you think this coined phrase has been hijacked, watered down, and diluted so much by right-wing politicians, preferably the Republican Party? Why do you think it's been watered down so much?
Well, I think first and foremost, Marlon, whatever the terminology that was chose, you know what the agenda is, right? It could have been called something different, but I think that there's always been a movement across the country to where aspects of atrocities against different groups have been censored in some type of way. I think about even like in my home state in Mississippi right now, in terms of now they're trying to pass a CRT law. Of course, Texas had already passed one.
Yeah. Florida was the first one to do it. DeSantis did that first. Then Abbott went ahead and do it. Now here in Georgia, Governor Kemp racist ass is trying to pass the same thing too. He's not calling it that, but he's basically it encompasses that, right? So it consists of that very thing.
What I want everyone to understand as it relates to this is you are accountable for what you know and for what and for how you process stuff.
Yep.
Right. So let's put all of this aside because I want to get to the meat of the matter.
Yeah.
You understand the ploy in terms of the redirection, of your attention from dealing with what you need to deal with. Now, in your own private space, in your own public space, your church, your home, public gatherings, your fraternities, your sororities, what are you using that time to do, Mara?
Yep.
What are you using that time to do? Now that's where the rubber really meets the road now. And so this planned leisure and the access that we do have to the public through these mechanisms, and I want to be very clear about this, these groups that were put together to sustain the African-American community during times of discrimination.
Yep.
What are you doing with that now? It's even more important now that you understand the censorship around you talking about the past, a history that birthed you.
Yep.
I want to be very clear about that. And so when you can sit here in the midst of this and not begin to strategize, not begin to formulate and gather and collaborate with each other to start thinking about, what are we going to do as a result of this? This actually, Marlon, this stuff, it's always been in your hands to tell that truth, right?
Yes, it definitely has.
In your hands. So now somebody telling you not to tell it, you upset. No, this has been passed to you anyway, right?
Basically.
I'm calling folks out, seriously.
Absolutely. And you know what? And on this show, this is exactly what we do. This is exactly why I have these conversations on the show, because we can't just point out all the positive. We got to point out the negatives and the realities of where we are right now and what we can be doing more of moving forward to help us get to a better place in life when it comes to the advancement of Black people. We have to do our part monolithically. We're not monolithic. And that's the biggest problem that I have with us. Or we're monolithic for the wrong things at the wrong times. The more important issue that we need to get to is not fully being discussed. We're not fully bringing enough awareness to. We want to sit up here and do it when it's occasionally conveniently for us to do. And so on this show, it's an everyday thing. It's an ongoing process. I'm talking about repeated topics until we're at a better place within that topic. And then I can move forward to the next topic and say, all right, let's focus our attention on this too. Because the one thing about Black people that I oftentimes speak about on this show is that we're fighting too many damn fights and we ain't won one yet. We're fighting ourselves, we're fighting each other, and then we're fighting the system too. So which one are we gonna pick and choose and actually win for once? So we can't win them all.
In terms of
fight them all.
Right. So in terms of intraracial politics within our community, that which is in our control, right?
Yep.
Why are you mad at somebody calling you out about something that you ain't been doing anyway? I mean, I'm being serious, and I want to be very critical, even of my own self on that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
A law has been passed about teaching something that you hadn't even took a part in teaching anyway. What are you mad for? I mean, I'm not being facetious here, and it's
very much so.
Very truthful, because you got a lot of people that'll use this as an issue on the other side to forward, to get as cannon fodder to forward their own personal agendas. You have nothing to say about this, even in terms of now after the fact, when you saw the movement gaining momentum before it even got to the statute level to where it became state law, to where you should have been speaking out about it. You had nothing to say. You watch it, you saying, they got this going on. No, so what are you gonna do? So that puts us again back at a disadvantage, something that we should have been doing in the first place, right? Now it's a law against it, right? And so I think that's very telling of kind of solidarity.
Yeah, I mean, people are opportunists in today's time. Well, you brought up an interesting point earlier in the show when you talked about how when things benefit them or when things affect them and come hit their doorway in real time, then that's when they want to get on board and actually speak about that situation. But no, it shouldn't have to affect you. We should be learning vicariously through each other. I shouldn't have to go through it in order for me to actually have empathy towards that particular plight. We're supposed to be able to say, okay, because it happened to one of my brothers and sisters, it can happen to me too. And before it happens to me or one of my brothers and sisters, we need to jump right on board and actually speak up and be a unified front for that particular narrative.
That's being proactive, Marlon.
Yep.
I think that's
not reactive. Yep, absolutely.
Right.
We're very much so. Yeah, we're very much so dropping the ball a lot when it comes to being reactive versus being proactive. And we have to do better at that because otherwise we're going to always be behind the curve when it comes to making true progress. We've made some, but for the last 50 years or so, we've been on a damn treadmill. We've been running, but we ain't got no damn where because we've been stuck and thinking that, we've got to a place where we're accepted now. We're equal now. Well, who the hell told you that when you think about all these different things that's been happening? When you think about how police brutality has still been existing all this time and where it stems from, when you think about all these racial disparities as it pertains to the housing, to education, when it comes to the workforce, when you can sit up here and do a research study that shows that these big companies, Fortune 500 companies, will look at resumes and tell you Black by your first name and then throw your damn resume in the damn garbage before they read the very last page of that damn resume and see that you actually were qualified for the damn position. When you think about the things that Brian Flores in the NFL is going through, when the very short leash that Black coaches are having in the NFL when it comes to actually winning and losing, you got an owner potentially allegedly being said that he actually was willing to pay Brian Flores money to lose games. The man had 2 winning seasons and still got fired. Now he's suing the NFL and that team among a few other teams and still employed. But you got some Black people saying, well, if he's suing them, why even be a coach? Well, the man gained a lot of experience in this particular profession. Why the hell should he not be able to be employed? Why should he not be able to do what he wants to do in the sport that he loves to actually coach in? Same thing for Colin Kaepernick.
And there should be
he settled money for the NFL.
There should be an expectation for him that that's not expected of other people either, right?
Really though, so Colin Kaepernick can't be given another goddamn job in the NFL in the sport that he loves to play because he settled out of court with the NFL. He basically was talking about this very thing, that if America is so damn great, then live up to your objectives and your principles there. We're going to hold you accountable for the very thing that you said you're great at. Prove it there. And so, and when you get called out on it, you want to sit up and tell us that we're un-American and unpatriotic? The most patriotic thing a Black person can do is serve a country that don't serve them in any positive way whatsoever. So I always give much love and credit and recognition to our Black men and women who are in the military field, in military forces, no matter what area of military that you're in. The fact that you made the decision to serve this country, despite knowing how this country really feels about us, because our Black men and women during the 60s and 70s came home and didn't have a damn home to come to, and had people looking at them crazy as if they didn't serve this damn country and the protection of our rights here in this country too. That's unpatriotic when it comes to how we were treated when we came back home. That's unfair. That's un-American. But let's get to this other point I want to ask you about. So I want to ask you this question. So why has it been such an issue for lawmakers who are trying to remove the idea of critical race theory? What do we need to do when it comes to fighting against them trying to remove it from school systems and curriculums in general?
Well, Marlon, I'll say this first. Everyone else in the country outside of the southeastern states who seceded from the United States of America has made statements regarding and repudiating this movement. So I'll give you a couple of organizations. The American Historical Association, which is the premier leading historical organization in the United States of America, and you can look the statement up that they made, has at every step of this movement has made statements against them doing states doing this. They condemn their actions. The Organization of American Historians, about the second leading top organization, they've made statements against it. And so in terms of scholars and learned people, that's not an issue. Now, I think the other part of it comes down to who the movement is trying to subscribe to anyway, and that's people who are voters, and it's a political issue. And it's not necessarily a public policy issue in terms of impacting the quality of life of people, which it quote unquote what the statement is. It has a political undergirding, right?
Yep.
I want to be very clear about that in terms of who the movement, where it originates from, and kind of who's behind it. But at the same way, going back to your question, how do we address this? We address this by making sure that we have a organized, collaborative effort, concerted effort of pulling together and making sure that across all ethnicities, I'm talking about Black, brown, yellow, that we make sure that we are in public spaces sharing our history. I give you examples. I work on a lot of public history projects, whether that be through public speaking, whether that be through erecting monuments, historical markers, and that type of stuff like that. How do we know you were here unless we see those type things, Marlon?
Yeah.
And so I think that in your local community, you just take a walk around in your community. And if you see something that's missing, because there's a history that other people know that you don't know, we need to document those stories, Marlon. Yeah. I'm on the front line of that at the university that I'm working at, to where there's so much lost history that only a handful of people know, to where I have to document that so that it's put institutionalized to where it can be given out for public access.
Yeah.
I think that we have to make sure that that next step of preserving, documenting, and disseminating our history from this point, that we put more into that, and that's where our energy needs to go right now. I mean, we can sit here and talk about the laws, and we always gonna face, by virtue of who we are in this country, we always gonna face, and that's unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate too, because the thing about that I find so unfortunate and so stupid is that, so I recently saw that the House passed the bill, the Crown Act, which basically prohibits any businesses from discriminating against people, preferably us, based on our hair texture and design of our hair and things like that. Why in the blue hell do I fucking need a bill to tell me that? Why do you need a bill to tell you that? Why do you need a rule to tell you in the NFL, the Rooney Rule, we're gonna give Black people and minorities an opportunity to at least apply and interview for the job. Not necessarily saying we're going to guarantee them the job, despite them having the damn qualifications for the damn job.
And you get
compared to their
incentives.
white
And
counterparts.
you get incentives if you do it.
But you're meeting quotas here just to check a box off. You know what I mean? See, what's fascinating and very just daunting to me is that the fact we need to have these damn laws in place just for you to sit up here and not discriminate. So you can't do this shit out of the kindness of your heart, or at the mere fact that you saying you're not racist. And the most racist thing in the world that I find to be very true and consistent across the board is that the one person tells you that you're racist for bringing up racism is the racist person themselves. it's a triple entendre. I find that to be so fascinating. So you're going to call me a racist, which by definition, black people can't be racist. Ladies and gentlemen who listen to this damn show, let me make sure I make this very fucking clear. Black people cannot be racist. You know why? Because the suffix in the word racism is ism, which is system. We don't control the narrative. We're not in positions of power to basically discriminate against another race for our own personal gain. And we don't control the narrative. That's the prime importance of that whole idea of not being racist. But if we were in positions of power to stop white people from getting jobs, from getting houses, from getting quality educations and qualities of life, then we'll be deemed racist. But because we're not in those positions to do that, we cannot be racist, okay? We can be prejudiced, we can be biased, but those two words don't even equate to what racism is and what it consists of. So let's make sure, I wanna make sure all my listeners, followers, especially all my, who are obviously Black, understand the difference between prejudice, racist, and biased. Everyone has a bias, because bias is more so about preference, you know what I mean? Versus racism, that's systemic and institutional. Those are positions, those are places and things that are in place for one race in particular to actually have the momentum and to gain even more power over other races and discourage them from actually being in that same room. So if we don't have the positions of power to make any decisions, I can sit up here and say I don't like white people, but guess what? I'm not going to be able to stop any white person from getting a job or getting a quality education, versus them telling us that, which history has deemed it to be true. They have said these things, oh, no Black people here. And they have made it so to where those laws were in place just to basically combat the segregation aspect of it. So, and I think back on this too, is that as I get older, I realize integration might have been the biggest downfall when it comes to us. Because when it came down to us having our own shit, we had our own shit. But guess what happened with Black Wall Street when we had our own shit? So I watched a documentary on Black Wall Street, and I saw how this whole entire situation came about of a mere accident of a Black man on an elevator with a white woman who just actually, when he saw it was a white woman on there, he realized, okay, I don't even want to be around this woman because I don't want to get killed for being around this woman, and anybody insinuating that I was trying to talk to her or do anything else. He ran off the elevator and just so happened to just like get a piece of her skirt. And she cried and hollered, cried wolf. And from that point on, a whole damn weekend, maybe just 2 days, they wiped an entire Black-owned neighborhood, Black-owned businesses. People were wiped away. They can sit up and say that they documented how many Black people died, but they don't really know. I'm willing to bet it was more Black people that got killed during that time than they would like to believe. The fact that they were even allowed to have bombs being dropped on this land, on this soil, on U.S. soil, Black people have been the ones that have been enslaved, been basically marginalized the most, and been discriminated the most against when it comes to all these different issues that we've dealt with. And with Black Wall Street happening the way it did, you know, they recently did a study and said that it was almost over $400 million of that generational wealth that we missed out on. Because even in today's time, when they commemorated the 100th anniversary of Black Wall Street and that massacre that happened, they did that research and then they saw there's not one business in Tulsa, Oklahoma right now that Black people own in that particular area where Black Wall Street actually was happening at that time. that is very unfortunate. That's very daunting at the fact that we had a way of generating our own generational wealth, and you took that from us. So what were we supposed to do then? We basically had to start from scratch yet again, and yet we still haven't got to a point where we're collectively, we may have some individuals here and there who are very wealthy, but yet we still haven't got to a place where no one is even thinking about restarting Black Wall Street again. And I get fascinated and in understanding why that's not even the case now. Because if you have all this money and your positions of wealth to an extent, and you know damn well you didn't come from wealth, you had to build that wealth yourself. So why not be one of those Black people who are wealthy to start Black Wall Street over again and start generating that wealth for our future generations too? I just don't get that. And so I just want to know from you, Dr. Robinson, personally, what have been the counter arguments that you've been hearing in regards to combating these very lawmakers from even bringing this forward to legislation to say we're going to stop this from happening when it comes to teaching critical race theory? What has been the conversation that you've been having with some of your contemporaries as it pertains to this matter?
Well, the obvious is, particularly as it relates, they've started on the grade school level, and the next level will be for them to put measures into place against college professors, and of course, due to freedom of our freedom of expression as scholars and as teachers, that's one of the things that the academy or institutions of higher education have different from public schools, right? Because we have a set curriculum, but within the confines of our classroom, we develop our own syllabi. And in terms of the content, we shape it, along with our areas of expertise, right? And so I want to be very clear about that in terms of the way they've approached this. And even now, in certain states, people have been trying to revoke tenure.
Wow. So just
so
they wouldn't have that leverage to talk about or teach whatever they would like to have, teach in their own class.
And so that's been a very hot issue. I'm serving on a panel coming up in October of later this year of a group from Oklahoma and a group from Texas that are going to talk about what adjustments do we have to make and how do we improvise or put together strategies to kind of deal with kind of the conundrum now of what to teach and what not to teach, because I teach a lot of social studies teachers that are going to be out in the public domain at high schools, middle schools, teaching social studies, history, ethics, that type of stuff, ethnic studies and that type of stuff. And so it's important, number one, that in terms of the way in which the laws are wrote, that you stick to the integrity of what the curriculum is, right? We're trying to reduce ethnocentrism. And so that's very important. And I think that mount across the board, when you don't have, particularly in districts where you don't have cadre of teachers who are meeting with each other and kind of talking about how you approach this or how you approach that in terms of pedagogically, you really need to start reaching out to other people in terms of making sure that y'all stay in the confines of state statute, but also that you make sure that you teach what you're supposed to be teaching.
Very much so. I mean, but it's the understanding too that you in reality, we have to teach what's going on around us, right? And so those things have to be taught to us, because when we get out into the world after graduation and we realize that the very things that we've been exposed to wasn't quite covering all aspects of what life is truly like for us, regardless of whether you're Black, white, Asian, or Hispanic. It's like thinking about how we're all impacted in this world is just mere human beings, and how we all have a place in this world from a diversity perspective is understanding that we aren't the only ones that live here. So why should we have situations where it's a reoccurring event of Black people still having to go through these situations, and then other races looking at it and like, man, I hate that they're going through that. Again, we don't need your sympathy. What we need you to do is be our allies, like you say you are. If you say you got Black friends and Black co-workers or Black relatives for that matter, do something about it. Use your position of power to basically make the playing field even across the board.
And Marlon, I'll say also taking tangible steps outside of those arenas I mean, you understand how tumultuous and how contentious those topics are in that arena. Hey, at your church, again, at your fraternity meetings, the groups that I work with outside of my job, the young boys that we work with, that we take to football games, basketball games, we have conversations about this type of stuff. And it's one, first of all, to let them know the histories of their foremothers and forefathers, but more importantly, how do they fit into this narrative, this American narrative? Because if you don't see yourself in that narrative, you don't even believe that you fit into that narrative.
Absolutely.
And I think it's very important in terms of how this has been approached, is kind of this void making in the history of this country's the narrative. And so I think that we, to make sure that we kind of hold a line on that, and make sure that everybody knows about everybody, whether that, again, across different races, across different ethnicities, even across different religious groups. I think that's very important. But your time in terms of your civic engagement outside of the classroom, whether you work in education, but your engagement there at your church, your engagement in your fraternities, your sororities, and even other community groups, taking the time to center things on things around that history, because if they're not going to get it in public schools, it is unlawful for them to teach it there. We need to create spaces, as we did in the past. We held civil rights, voter rights meetings at churches, right? Yep. So we need to be having this, everybody says it's Black History 365 days. You need to show me, right? And we need to start having theme meetings around that, and start teaching, making sure that we do our part. If the ball is dropped this point forward, it's because you know the law, you know what it doesn't do. So what are you going to do to address it? And
absolutely.
In terms of being proactive and making sure that the measures are put into place, that I collaborate with people, groups that are trying to situate themselves in the public domain, in a sense, to make sure that generations under us, those vulnerable kids that they don't know and they don't have access to resources to learn the stuff, that we make that available to them, but more importantly, give them an understanding so that they can pass it on to the next generation. And that's the type of infrastructure that I'm looking at helping people to build, and to make sure that the kids, the next generation coming behind me, that they know that. And I think that's the first step that everybody has to look at, it to take assessment of your community. What are the opportunities that you have to present this? And then on those stages, you make sure that you're presenting that information in a consumable manner where the kids can get it. And so we can't complain about what it is. It was what it was during slavery. It was what it was during the segregation era. But what did we do? We still had to work within the confines of that, and we're here again in the same situation. Yep. So now we got to step up. I don't want you to spit no history to me. I want you to put it down, and let's have public forums around it, so that we can share it with our kids, because they are the torchbearers. They're going to lead us into the future. As much as I want to, I know I'm not going to live forever. Yep. And so the testament of what I did is going to be witnessed through what I gave to the people that are coming behind me.
That knowledge, that information, that education and enlightenment, that's much more vital than anything you can pass down materially, right? So yes, we have to be very much so conscientious about that when it comes to passing that information down. And this is what this show primarily is about. It's providing information to our Black community that we can apply to our everyday lives. This information that I talk about with different people who specialize in these areas are very much so applicable to our everyday life. And I hope that people are sharing and dispersing this information to other people, because that's the only way we're going to actually be ahead in life when it comes to us being monolithic as a Black community, doing our parts together. And I oftentimes say this, we each have a part to play in this. If we're not doing our part as individuals on a collective scale, then what the hell are we doing? Why are we doing it? You know what I mean? And so, and it's with the understanding, we're operating with the understanding of that white people typically enough know more of our history than we do. And that's why they're willing to erase and cover up so much of it. But we're willing to be ignorant to the fact that we don't know certain things. And it's like we keep going years and years and years without learning these things. And now, and then we get to a point where we're stuck. It's like, wait a minute, I didn't know that. Now, some of these things that we learn later on become the very minimum things we should have learned all along. Right. And so for me to hear about on the kindergarten, on the K through 12 or K through 8 scale, they're trying to sit up here and eliminate the idea of slavery. It's like, no, we're not going to teach our kids that Black people were owned by white people. We're not going to teach them that. So you basically want to dilute the truth. You want to give them whatever truth you feel as though should be given to them, not the actual truth. And so white people, I want you to understand something. Critical race theory is not about basically highlighting the very, it's not just about saying, oh, you know what, you're racist because, and your ancestors were racist. No, we want to highlight what happened in the past so it doesn't happen again or doesn't continuously happen. Because some of those things, if not all of them, are still happening in some form of ways. And we're trying to do away with it altogether by coming together and saying, you know what? I'm not going to sit up here and say that you're racist, but I am saying you're benefiting from racism, which is the truth. If you're not willing to do something about it in your position of power, white person, then how could you really say you are our ally? How could you really say you care about us? You can sit up here and talk about the many white people who actually stood up and walked and marched with Dr. King. Okay, great. Where are you now? Because some of you all changed your agenda. Some of you all changed your views and opinions about how you feel about us based on whatever conception or based on negative connotation that's been associated with us since the beginning of time. Because I even talked about this on one of my previous episodes about how Africans perceive us in America versus how we perceive Africans in Africa. We sit up here and see these different commercials about Africans saying, oh, for 35 cents a day, you can feed a starving African child who doesn't have good food and clean water and things like that. But on the flip side of that, Africans are being shown that we're thugs, we're criminals. We have a bunch of kids that are wedlock, we're on welfare. See, these are all negative connotations that's associated with our name as Black people that we ourselves have to fix to a degree, but with the understanding that racism, we didn't build racism, we didn't create racism. So since we didn't create racism, it's your job to basically undo that. You created racism, so it's your job and responsibility to make sure it's done away with. We're going to be there to basically benefit from that and making sure that it's an equal playing field across the board, but you have to do your part first. And as lawmakers, we need our educators like yourself and many others who are in this field and teaching this area of expertise in regards to our future generation of kids learning these things from you all. We need our educators in those rooms with those lawmakers, basically giving them the facts about what critical race theory is, because that's the only way we're going to actually see any real change happening when it comes to suppressing our votes, when it comes to learning about what the true origin of this country was really stemmed from, and what it was predicated on. And so if we're not doing those things, then we can't really say we're really making real progress in this damn country. More importantly, we can't really say we're making real progress in our Black community, which leads me to my last question. What can we be doing, or what can we do as Black people in the Black community to push the agenda of teaching our kids what critical race theory is, primarily what our history is? Because we shouldn't be learning our history just in the classroom. We need to be learning these things on an everyday basis outside of the classroom. Our families taking us to different places, taking us different trips and learning about historical monuments, things of that nature. I think we get so hung up on symbolism, right? We get so hung up on symbolic gestures when we see Vice President Kamala Harris being inaugurated in as the first Black woman, the first woman in the United States vice presidency, right? We think about those type of things that happen, and we think about Barack Obama being inaugurated as well as the first Black president of the United States. These symbols, these are all great gestures nonetheless, but do you think we get too hung up on that? And what should we be doing to be teaching our kids what critical race theory really is?
Well, I think first of all, that starts in your own individual home, Martin. You know, my kids benefit from having a father with degrees in history. But I think that my reach is a lot further than that. The boys that come over and play basketball in my yard, with my son, the boy groups that I mentor at church, even more than that, the different men groups that I'm in, and sharing that knowledge. I think that we need to make sure that we take on the baton in terms of sharing knowledge about, our history. And more importantly, I think that the next step is really institutionalizing that within our churches and within our group, our community group, whether that be civic, fraternal, etc. These groups, that we need to make sure that is a part of your mission, right? Yep. You were founded as a black Greek letter organization, and you understand that, right? The community that birthed you, right? And taking that on,
and the obligation that we have to that community.
Yes, and so I think that's one step right there, that we should secure that, right? That at the very least, at the very minimum, in those spaces within those organizations, we should be spreading it. And if we can, with those groups, if we can get them active and going forward with that type of stuff, why don't we win? We can just right there. But I think that right now, it's a couple of points you made that were so poignant in terms of being so fragmented. In many instances, we're worried about the wrong thing.
Yep.
You don't quit worrying about what's not in your hand. Take care of that which is in your hand. Yep. And if you take care of that which is in your hand, you got something you can build on, right? And I think that which is in our control right now is our making sure that we put our energy into making sure that in the spaces that we're in, the spaces that we control, that we make sure that this history is taught. Yeah. And those spaces, people who want to come in and they want to contribute to that, to welcome those individuals, because I think that everybody is not an anti-CRT person. I want to say that everybody's not an anti-CRT person, and everybody who's non-black is not an anti-CRT person. I think that
I think it's just a level of confusion about what the actual phrase encompasses, right? It's just understanding what does this consist of when it comes to that. But I think for the sake of us and for the sake of our past existence, as well as our present and future existence, if we're not doing our part to make sure that we're basically telling our story as Black people, or telling the story of Black people, which is the very history that is ingrained in this country, then we're doing our community and our culture a disservice. Absolutely.
Right. And I agree with you totally on that. And so we don't have any time to complain. We don't have any time to cry about that. Reach out to the like-minded individuals in your immediate community, in your household, that are willing to pull together to do that. I mean, particularly educators that have access to kids in after-school programs. They have access to kids in church programs. They have access to kids in civic groups. Those are the spaces that we need to start creating and infusing this knowledge in. Because if we lose on those fronts, the spaces that we have control over, then we really lost in, right?
Very much so. Yep.
And so I think that the other part about that is now that people want to sound the alarm and the red light on this, but I mean, this, like you said, a lot of the stuff that the accusation of being taught is not even being taught anyway. And so what it is to me, Marlon, this is the way I take it, is this is a wake-up call for me to be more accountable.
Very much so. And you know what, and I talked about that too, so to an extent. I do feel like I strongly feel like we lack accountability in our Black community in so many different ways and areas that, and again, to your point, it's not even enough time in a lifetime to even touch on all these issues, because we're having to deal in real time. We got to deal with current issues and previous issues. I'm tired of us having to pass that baton of issues down to the next damn generation to deal with. Every generation deserves to have their own generational issues to deal with in that moment in time. We should be dealing with previous and past 2 generations of issues, because now we got to deal with that on top of our workload is entirely.
Unfortunately, we don't have the benefit. We don't benefit of that.
We don't. We really don't.
Like you said, it's a cycle and it's a rat race, and we rehash so much that continues to inundate us as a community. But more certainly, and I'm certainly in line with what you said in terms of solving some of these problems. I mean, we got to get something off the plate that we corrected, right? Something we can hang our hat on and say that this, we successfully addressed this issue, and that just does not seem like it's happened, right? Because it's like the same things that have impacted the previous generations, we're still dealing with those things. And that's been part and parcel of our experience and our existence in this country. And the part about this thing that is so disconcerting, right? That
Very much so.
It never seemed like you can catch a break or that you can take a sigh of relief because you've actually obtained or you've actually achieved anything. Because when you cut the TV on and you look at the news, this is still going on.
Oh my God.
On your street, all of this stuff is, is still going on. But brother, what we have to do is to be steadfast and continue to move forward with the optimism that these things is going to turn in the right direction. But more importantly, for those individuals who are willing to carry that baton, because you think about at Russ College, had you not had the acculturation experience there to where people brought light to things that you were not aware of, and even the work that you do now, right?
Yep.
You think about that baton pass, and you're a part of that baton pass. The things that you were exposed to inform your actions right now. In
Very
terms
much so.
Bring light to and to highlight. And so that's very important. And I always say that, to my former students and people who are doing this type of work. The wins are few, it seems. But what you have to always do is set the groundwork for those who are coming behind you. So
to pick up where you left off and be able to take it even further than where you could even take it at a given moment of time. And so, and like I said, I oftentimes say this: we each have an obligation to each other to be a service to each other. And my uncle used to tell me that knowledge is not power. Applied knowledge is, though.
Yes.
So if you learn something, you don't apply it, how the hell can you even say you learned it?
Nah.
If you're not applying it. And so, and it has to be applicable to not just you, but to everybody around you too. You have to be able to disperse that information because, and another thing, I always quote, my mom, my uncle, my grandfather. My grandfather used to say, 10% of what happens to you is my responsibility. If I know something that you don't know and you need to know, and I don't tell you, I've done you a disservice. Now, once I tell you what you need to know and you don't apply it, guess what? I've done my part. At least I told you, though. But if I'm sitting up here just withholding information that's vital to your existence and then to your everyday life too, then how am I really actually being of service to you? We are here to be of service. And that's the bigger point that we have to oftentimes remind ourselves. And I oftentimes have to remind myself that too, because I'm not perfect, but the same token, having these discussions and bringing forth this awareness in this fashion is going to help us stay abreast of what we need to be doing and what our obligations are, which is our community. And so I'm not anti anything, but I am pro-Black. I'm pro-us. And I'm all about fixing my house first before I can worry about the rest of the damn neighborhood. But once my house is established now, it's time to fix the rest of the neighborhood. Then from that neighborhood on to the rest of the world. That's the way it's supposed to work. And so for me, I hope that we oftentimes are very, very much so bringing forth this type of awareness and being able to share this information with each other, because we each have we should have an obligation to our race and to our culture, because no one else is going to care about us more than we care about us. If ain't nobody else got us, we have to have us. That's the bottom line to it all. And so, again, I really appreciate you for shedding light on this. I know, like I said, this has been an ongoing conversation throughout the world, and primarily for you as as a professor who's studying and specializing in this area of race and justice. I really appreciate you for enlightening and educating myself as well as my viewers and listeners on this show, because like I said, I'm looking forward to us having not just more of these conversations and bringing more forth this awareness that we should be aware of at this point in time, but making sure that we're out here on everyday life, doing our due diligence to make sure that we're doing what we need to do out here as individuals, collectively, as a unified front. And so from that perspective, again, I really appreciate you for being on the show to talk about this.
And I want to encourage you too, Marlon, man, continue to do what you're doing, man. Everything you're doing is coming from the heart, from
very much so.
and make sure, man, that you align yourself with people who are nurturing, who are contributors, and that are going to support, what you have going on, and to move our communities forward, man. We experience so much,
So
and
much.
that all of our inspiration is born out of tragedy, right? but
Man.
but that should not always be the case. I should be able to pass something down to you that is not broken all the time. And that one thing that is not always broken is our inspiration for learning. That's something that you certainly have, and our dissemination of that knowledge that we have and the application of that knowledge, which is very important, that we distribute to people, positions us, Martin, so that we can have healthier, thriving communities. And I think that the work that you're doing professionally, and even what you're doing with the podcast, is a testament to that. And I continue to support and to ask you to take that banner forward.
Very much. And Dr. Robertson, I really appreciate you for saying that, because I saw a need for this podcast in regards to what information needs to be put out there, because it's a lot of information out there that's being put out there for other aspects of, the Black community. Black celebrities getting a lot of, credit for what we do on an everyday basis. Us everyday Black men and women need to be given acknowledgement and credit for what we're doing in real time that's really impacting our community and culture in that regard. And so I saw a need for this, and I said, I want to make sure that my voice is being heard. I'm using my platform and position of power in this regard to make sure that we are dispersing this information out to everyone who needs to hear it. It's in our Black community, because if we don't have us, ain't nobody else gonna get us. And so, and the fact that I know I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to talk to Black men and women who have those answers, who are in these respective fields and areas that can speak to the very thing that we need to be doing. And so a lot of times I interview people, it's about, oh, well, I saw a need for this, and so that's why I went into this particular profession or this particular role and things like that. So the fact that we all obviously see those needs, and that we overcome the adversity that we've overcome, that speaks to the true testament of who we really are as a culture and as a race. So
yeah,
I appreciate the many work that you're doing. I hope to have you on the show again and talk more about this and the other things that we're doing progressively when it comes to what progress we've made so far within the last time we've talked. And hopefully that comes in the upcoming months. And so I'm hoping that we keep fighting a good fight, and we're going to make true progress and really truly make our ancestors proud of us as to where we are today and where they couldn't be, due to the very disparities that they went through. And so, again, for all my listeners, man, make sure you like, share, subscribe to this YouTube channel on the show. Make sure you subscribe to my Instagram and Facebook page for Speak to the Mic podcast show. Make sure you follow me on all podcast platforms, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, and all those wonderful things. And so I've been putting out more content and talking to more Black men and women on this show about these particular areas of need that we actually see that we need to be improving on collectively as a unified front. So again, Dr. Robinson, thank you for your time, and I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
Definitely look forward to talking to you again on the show.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
If you like what you've heard from this week's episode and would like to hear more from previous episodes, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel below. You can also find me on social media platforms at Speak to the Mic _podcast show on Instagram and Speak to the Mic podcast show on Facebook. Be sure to also like, share, and subscribe to my Spotify page at Speak to the Mic podcast show. As I put out more thought-provoking content, your opinion and thoughts are needed and appreciated. I thank you all in advance for your support and look forward to hearing from you soon.